So now I want to talk to you all about just some tips for how to use FRED, Federal Reserve Economic Data, how to use Excel. A couple of folks from the previous workshop said even just some tips about how to quickly create a chart or a graph would be helpful. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Some of this might be a little bit rudimentary for you, so I apologize, but I just want to show the basics, particularly if you haven't done a lot of graphs recently, you want to get better. Bill and Parker both sort of stole my thunder, though. I was going to emphasize practice, practice, practice. It's just like anything else, like playing the piano or playing baseball. You don't get good at something just by doing it once. You got to do it over and over again. And frequently, a lot of skills you're not good at when you first started, and it's just practice. All right. So I'm going to walk through two, maybe three exercises, depending on how much time we have. The first exercise I want to do is graph inflation, because I think that might be the kind of thing you might be interested in, show your boss, whether for it's a memo or perhaps a presentation. So let's say the goal is we want to see what inflation looks like from 2000 to the present. So there's a few ways we can do this, but I strongly recommend we go to the Fiscal Lab website to start. All right. So we've talked about how we have this reference links page up, and it includes a lot of links to important publications or reports from various agencies, CBO, JCT, etc. And this is also a living document too, so if there are things you think that should be up there but aren't, feel free to ping us and we can update this page. But we're going to go to FRED, Federal Reserve, Bank of St. Louis, Federal Reserve Economic Data. All right. And we actually provide links to some of the most common things you might want to look at. Nominal GDP, real GDP, CPI is what I want to talk about today, as well as the following one, the personal consumption expenditures, chain type price index, unemployment rate. So we're interested in inflation. We're interested in inflation, so let's start with CPI for all urban consumers. Okay. Can you guys see that clearly? Okay, cool. All right, so we talked a little bit about CPI last time, but in case you weren't here or you want a refresher, CPI, Consumer Price Index, is the most commonly cited measure of inflation. It tracks a basket of goods that consumers buy. Because in the economy, there's consumer goods, investment goods, things the government buys, but a lot of people are interested in, well, what's the inflation rate consumers face? Because consumption is such a big part of the economy. All right, now the CPI, as you recall, is what's called an index number. So you get a basket, and you have to set, the easiest way to do it is set this basket equal to 100. And then you track the basket over time. And the basket does change. It's updated. I don't want to go into that in great detail. So you'll see, we see CPI, you see the years from the start of the series, that's 1947, and it's through December, so 1947, 01, 01, that's January 1st, 1947, meaning it's January 1947, updated all the way through December 2025. That's the most recent month we have CPI data for. We'll have January data, I believe, next week, if anyone, Bill or anyone else knows. But anyway, it'll be updated soon. All right, so I said we're interested in inflation data from 2000. Year 2000 onward, because historical data is interesting, but probably not especially relevant to what you guys are mostly working on. All right, anyone have any thoughts about where we go next? Yeah.
Maybe change the date from 1947 to 2000, January 1st.
Yes, and FRED defaults to having a day. CPI again is updated monthly. It just throws in the day 01. That's not literally the day it comes out, though. It's because certain series on FRED will be daily. They'll have stock indices, for instance. There's daily data, there's monthly data, weekly data, depending on what you're looking at. A lot of historical data is on FRED. All right, so very good. We'll go to January 2000. All right, so now this is the CPI index, but it's not an inflation rate yet. So any thoughts on what's next? All right, we're going to go to Edit Graph. Okay, so now we see line 1. This is the line we're looking at, Consumer Price Index for urban consumers. You'll notice it has a name, but also has a code. Sometimes just knowing the code is handy. You can just search in the search bar for the code, or you could type out whatever you're interested in. All right, units. So we're interested in units. So as of right now, the measure is set in units. Is this index number that's set to 100? That's the unit. So we want to change that to a growth rate. So there's different kinds of inflation we can look at. Because again, inflation is the growth rate of the price level. All right, we could do what's called percent change. And you'll notice, yes, it goes back to 2000. So if I just say percent change, that is from one period to the next. So we're saying, and CPI is monthly data, so we're saying it's a monthly percent change. When inflation data comes out, frequently you hear, well, what's the monthly rate? What was it from December to January? That's commonly cited, but perhaps even more commonly cited, or just cited as much, is, well, how is the price level change from a year ago? So let's look at percent change from a year ago. All right. So now we have our CPI inflation rate from 2000 to December. And you'll can see at the very end, there's actually there is one missing observation, and that's because of the shutdown back in the fall. Yep. And that can be an issue if you're trying to do like fancy schmancy modeling, but it's not a big deal for us right now.
You gotta impute that value.
Yes, exactly. All right. I think something that might be interesting to show is how does the CPI inflation rate compare with other measures of inflation? So before I had on the screen under the reference links, in the reference links page under the FRED section, what's called the PI, that's Personal Consumption Expenditures Chain Type Price Index. Are folks familiar? Have you heard that PCE inflation as opposed to CPI? All right. So CPI is the oldest inflation rate that we have data from. And that frequently comes out at the very beginning of the month. PCE, Personal Consumption Expenditures, that's also looking at consumption data. Inflation consumers face. It's measured a little bit differently. It uses a different survey. The methodology that goes into it is a little bit different. So let's look. All right, so now as you see, when I add the new line, it brought us back to the historical series. So PCE data starts in 1959, so it's brought us back, it's reset the beginning to 1959, but we want to switch to 2000. So let's bring us back to January 2000. Okay. So we can see in the graph the two series now. You can probably see that they mostly follow together. They're a little bit different. So the blue line, that's the CPI inflation line. It's almost always a little bit higher than the PCE line. The CPI is in blue, PCE is in this dotted green line underneath. And you can hover over observations to see what the data actually looks like, what the data actually is. Why did I bring up PCE? In part because even though a lot of people are concerned with CPI, CPI is connected to things like calculating Social Security benefits, or at least a measure of CPI is, wages, union contracts, other kinds of contracts in the economy. So people generally think of CPI first, but PCE is also important. The Federal Reserve is especially interested in PCE inflation. The folks at the Fed say they think the PCE is a somewhat more accurate measure. And for that reason, when they talk about trying to achieve their inflation target, their 2% target, they're talking about PCE. They're talking about the PCE price index. Now, in general, they're pretty similar, but if you're going into a discussion like, well, is the inflation rate at target? Well, you should look at the PCE rate. So, okay. Let's go back to our presentation. Actually, I'm not going to go back to the presentation. So we have a couple, actually, yeah, there's a couple options we can do here for creating graphs. Fred will just let you download a graph. So let's go to download, and we'll see these options from the drop-down. We see CSV data, Excel data, image graph, PowerPoint graph. You guys see that clearly enough? Okay. All right. So you can simply just download an image if you are fine with that. Say you just want you just want this graph and you think this graph looks good for your boss, you can just click download, and that's easy enough. So let's go to Fred Graph PNG. Okay, easy enough. You could zoom in if you wanted to. Now, you can also say you want to tinker with the formatting or something with the colors, you can do that. You can format the lines. So let's go back to edit. And let's go to, let's say we don't like the dotted green line. We would prefer a different color. We can scroll, we can go to the format tab here. We can change different things. We can change the title, the axes. You'll see in the graph there are shades in the background. For certain years, those are recession years. You can get rid of that if you want to. Let's say I just want to make the dotted green line red. I can do that here. I can go to Format. I'm under line 2. I go to Customize. And let's say I don't like the dash. Let's say I like it solid. And I want it to be red, because I think that stands out better. You can just do that, and now here's your new graph. And that's easy enough, but you can also download this data in Excel if you want. And again, it says CSV data and then Excel data. I think for most of your purposes, Excel data is what you'd like. CSV is very useful for programming purposes or statistical analysis, like if you were using something like R or MATLAB. So perhaps you want to download it as a CSV file. If it's a CSV file, when you're operating in the file, you could create formulas, but if you try to save it and send it somewhere, then the formulas won't save. In a lot of cases, I think Excel is what you want. All right, let's go to Excel. And then, there we go, easy enough, there it is. So there's a README tab, that's your first tab, that kind of gives you the explanation of what the data is. And then voila, you have your data here. Did I lose anybody? Everyone? Yes, you have a, okay. All right. So that's simple enough. All right, now let's move on to another exercise that I thought might be useful for you folks. And that's, let's see what CBO has to say about what it thinks outlays are gonna be for the next 10 years. And we can do that by looking at the budget and economic outlook. Now, this was brought up earlier, the most recent version of that is going to come out next week. So the version that we have right now is from last year, so it's a little bit backward looking. So we're going to look at what was the projection of outlays for 2025 to 2035. Again, 2025 of course happened, but we're going to be looking at a previous report. So let's see, you can start on the Fiscal Lab page again, but we can also go straight here to the CBO Budget and Economic Outlook. All right, so here is the home page. You can download the full report. We're interested in the data itself, though. Okay, all right. So let's go to budget data, 10-year budget projections. Again, now we're interested in what does CBO think outlays are going to be for the next 10 years, starting 2025. All right, so let's go here, January 2025. I'll give you the budget projections. Okay, enable editing. All right, so I'm going to speed this up for you. We're going to go straight to table B1 is going to have the data we need. All right, folks caught up with me? Okay, all right. All right, so we are interested in, I said, let's look at outlays for right now. And again, we have different kinds of outlays. We have mandatory, discretion, and net interest, and those sum up to total outlays. And we are interested in the 10 years, 2025 to 2035. Okay. So now we want to graph this. So there's a couple options here. We could graph it in this spreadsheet, and it would just appear over these cells, or we could create it on a new workbook. So I'm kind of inclined to create a new workbook to keep it cleaner. All right, anybody have any thoughts about what we'd want to do next? Let's copy and paste the data over into the new workbook. So I'm going to create new. If everyone followed with me, I went to home, I went to file, new, blank workbook.
And if anyone gets stuck, raise your hand or your
All right. So now I have my new workbook. Now let's just call it, I'll call it my project. Okay. So I would say let's copy and paste our data over. That's the first step. So what are we interested in? We're interested in the different kinds of outlays. So I'm going to scroll over the 3 kinds of outlays here: mandatory, discretionary, net interest. I'm just going to move them over here. Let's go back. And then I want 2025 to 2035. So I'm going to click and drag over these cells. And I'm not sure if folks are aware of this, but when you're working in Excel and you want to click and drag certain cells, but not all the cells are connected to each other, what you can do is you can click Control after you've selected the first group of cells you want, and then you can skip down to where you want. All right, let's do Control C. And Control V is paste. Everybody with me? Okay. All right, so now I have what I want over here. My rows are my different kinds of spending, and then my columns are my years. I'm going to delete this extra column here. And Excel, to some extent, can make suggested graphs for you. So let's do that, particularly when you're working with smaller data sets. If you had like 1,000 variables, or it was daily data and it was a few thousand observations, it would have some trouble. But with just a few series like this, and you have 10 years worth of data and only 3 variables, it should work. So for graphs, we go over to Insert. I use graph and chart interchangeably because that's essentially what we mean. Let's just start and see what Excel recommends. And let's see, so here are the recommended charts. People follow along with what I did there. I went to Insert, went to Recommended Charts. Everyone has this screen? Okay. All right. So as you'll see, Excel will make a guess as to what it thinks you want. So right now, so the first option is actually what I was thinking about. Let's have just a line graph. But let's look at the other recommendations. Okay, so let's start here first. So actually, you know what? Let's actually just look at it bigger. Okay. So here we have our nice chart in the form of a line chart. Line charts are especially good for historical data, what's called time series data. You're looking at observables change over time. I'll talk about in a little bit how a line chart, when it's appropriate to use a line chart as opposed to a different kind of chart. Okay, so Excel did really what I wanted to. It made the line chart I want over these 10 years. So this is a basic chart. Are there any changes you might want to make before including this in a memo to your boss, for instance, though? Yes?
Change the title of it.
Absolutely. So that you can just simply do within Excel itself. Projected spending, so let's call this projected spending 2025 to 2035. Anything else you might want to do?
Add an axis label.
On the up and down, or?
Yeah.
Okay, what would your label say?
Millions and billions.
Right, so this data is in billions. So you tell me, would it be more appropriate to keep it in billions the way it is, and then people put together, well, 1,000 billion is a trillion, or would you rather have trillion? Is it easier if it just says 1 trillion, 2 trillion, 3 trillion, et cetera?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we remember how we convert from billions to trillions? We're gonna get rid of 3 decimals, we're gonna get rid of 3 zeros, right? So that's dividing by 1,000. So again, I'm sure you guys learn all this stuff like in high school or so, but if you don't do it often, then you forget how it works. So there's a couple ways to change the access. I think what might be neater for the purposes of this would be to just create new cells and make them clean cells where we do the conversion. So I'm going to move over here, and to the same row where we have the mandatory spending, I'm just going to move it over a few columns, this column N. what I'm going to do is I'm going to say equals, I'm going to take the first cell of spending, not B2, equals B4, divide by 1,000. Okay, so we just divided by 1,000 here. And what I can do now is, let's see, will this work? I think it will. Yes. If I click the bottom right of the cell and I drag it down 2 rows, Excel knows, oh, it wants to convert the data by 1,000 for all the other observations previously. And I'm just, so let's check that, make sure I did that right. So before I did B4 divided by 1,000, yep. Went down 1, B5 divided by 1,000, B6 divided by 1,000. Everyone following me? Okay. Now I can do, if I click the bottom right of that cell and I drag again, I can now drag it over several cells. Like that. And maybe what I'll do is here, I'm going to change the years again. I'm going to copy and paste the years over so I don't lose track of what I'm doing. Okay. And I'll label this. Okay. So now let me just fill in the remainder of these cells. And let's see. And now I can fill in. Let's do this. I'm going to drag to the end of my new series. That last cell on the right, I'm going to click the bottom right part of the box. I'm going to click and drag and bring it down all the way. And voila, now my numbers are in trillions. All right. Okay. So now I'm going to try this all over again. I'm going to highlight the series that I want, or the cells that contain the names of the series that I want. So it's mandatory, discretionary, net interest. And I'm going to copy paste all of these over. Go to insert, recommended charts. Ooh. All right, I think that's, let's see, all charts. I think that's because when I, over here in the conversion to trillions, I've highlighted 4 rows worth of data, but when I covered the names of the categories, there's only 3 cells. So the number of rows on each side has to match. Okay, now let's try this again. Insert. And on this bar here, you'll see it has all the different kinds of charts you might want to explore. I don't want to go through all the options, but there's bar charts, there's line charts, there's pie charts, there's what's called pivot charts, which are kind of cool. But let's start with recommended charts. Okay, so now I went to recommended charts. Excel understood what I was trying to do this time. Okay, so now my numbers are nice and in trillions. Okay. In certain options, you can just click on the box, and you can click on the box and edit accordingly right there. If not, and this is kind of a lot of learning by doing, you just kind of see how different buttons work. So the chart elements button is a pretty handy button for how to change things. Yes?
What if I wanted to better compare the growth rates between that and maybe move mandatory spending into a different axis?
You want to move mandatory spending to its
own axis, so that one would be on the left versus one on the right?
Oh, that is an interesting, that isn't,
I understand, yeah.
Yeah, what's that? Yeah.
Parker shaking his head.
Yeah, I mean, so interesting.
Truncates the value.
You know, I mean, so a person could do that. So what Joe is saying is, all these series, they follow the same rules. They're on the same axis, right? From 0 to $7 trillion. What do these series look like? Joe is wondering, can I make it have a separate axis on the right-hand side of the chart, and whatever, for whatever would be the most appropriate, you could do that.
But if you're comparing the growth rate to a level, you'd want to have one on the different axis so that you could show that comparison.
The data is the same. You can think about it conceptually differently. what is the point you're trying to make? Is it more relevant to have this in levels, where you're talking about the level of mandatory spending over time, or its relative share of the total? Or are you talking about changes over time, in which case you want to show growth rates? I would take that, if you want to make a point about growth rates, I would not try to put too many points in the same chart. You could, again, follow the same procedure to calculate a separate table of growth rates, and then put that in a separate chart. You would have the growth rate on the same axis. And then that'll, because the fact that mandatory spending is so much higher than discretionary spending means that it obliterates all the changes in discretionary spending. But if you convert that to a growth rate, it puts them back on the same scale, and you can compare them more easily with the same axis.
No, that totally makes sense. I think for the purposes of this exercise, I just wanted to start with the levels, and I wanted to kind of hit home. Everyone here knows this, but I think it's still worth illustrating and beating into everyone's heads, not literally, that mandatory spending is really the bulk of spending in the federal budget. And as you can see, it's projected to grow as an even larger share. The blue line is rising at a more rapid rate than the orange and green lines over 10 years.
Go back to the recommended charts. Because I think if you want to make that chart, so this chart here shows each one at the level, but go to the recommended chart, the third one. This stacked area chart, I think, is always useful for showing shares. So if you make that bigger, so that is going to show the total, and then it's going to put mandatory on the bottom, add discretionary, add net interest. So you can see more clearly the share that mandatory is of the total, because you're stacking it, the very top of the line shows you the total all at once. It's easier to make that comparison. Same data, different point that you want to make.
Absolutely, and I didn't do this exactly, but you sort of stole my thunder. That's okay.
Sorry.
That's okay, right. So I created this simple, I essentially created that earlier. I put it here in the PowerPoint ahead of time. I changed the numbers that were in the thousands, but really in the billions. I did what we had just done just now, where I switched the numbers over to trillions. I wrote trillions. It's a little hard to see, but it's on the y-axis it says trillions and it says $sign. Make sure you always have the currency there. I tweaked the labels a little bit more to specifically say outlays. And again, that's just. I think you can see that mandatory spending is growing at a faster rate, but I agree the shaded, the filled in graph can even hit that point. It can hammer it home a little bit more. A quick tip, say you create a chart in Excel and you really love it, and you say, I really want to save this and I just want it to be its own standalone chart, or maybe I want to copy and paste and put in a memo. You can right click on the chart, there's a button that'll say Move Chart. There'll be another button that says New Sheet. You can then just create a new sheet in Excel, and the chart will just be that sheet. That's handy if you have lots and lots of data, and let's say you want to create many charts, but you think, oh, this chart especially is really cool. I want to save this chart. Going through the Move Chart exercise can be handy.